Lô, lô, yo. Chào. Hôm nay là 16 tháng 8 2024, thứ 6 rồi. Nhà lại kết thúc một tuần làm việc. Tuần vừa rồi thì team của mình làm việc cũng khá là nhiều thứ phải làm, cũng như chạy deadline để hoàn thành trước 30 tháng 8. Tính đến thời điểm hiện tại thì resort cũng ổn. Sẽ có khả năng là sẽ hoàn thành được. Đó là công việc. Còn hôm nay thì mình sẽ vào luôn nhá. Tự dưng mình có đỏ đây do vừa nãy gãi. Clip đầu tiên mình đã xem là về của Y Combinator. Thì đây là một cái vườn ươm công nghệ rất là nổi tiếng trên thế giới rồi. Đầu tư vào rất là nhiều startup, kiểu nhiều trăm startup trong một năm. Và nó đã có những cái đầu tư vào, mình nhớ không nhầm thì có Airbnb, có Dropbox, không biết có Uber hay không, hình như là có Uber nữa. Đến đây thì clip này của Carpel. Ông này trước là founder của OnePlus. OnePlus là hãng điện thoại, nhưng mà sau đấy thì ra làm riêng. Không phải làm riêng mà là làm một công ty khác. OnePlus làm một công ty khác, và công ty tên là Nothing. Thì mình cũng khá bất ngờ khi mà nó trong vòng 2 năm qua, Nothing thì mình có theo dõi từ đầu rồi. Car này cũng tên hơi khó đọc. Thì Car này là một người rất là điềm tĩnh, rất là mình đã từng xem một cái clip, một cái podcast của Car rồi, và thấy rất là ngưỡng mộ luôn. Một người kiểu rất là nhẹ nhàng, không phải quá sôi nổi, nhưng mà có tầm nhìn, và có vẻ như là một fanboy của Apple, của Steve Jobs. Thì mình khá bất ngờ khi mà ở trong này title thì không ghi, nhưng mà ở trong cái này để xem nào. Bằng một, mình nhớ là trước là trong cái title như là có cái việc là công ty này đã bán được 600 triệu tiền revenue của những cái thiết bị di động, nên khiến cho mình khá là bất ngờ. Cho nên là mình quyết định là sẽ xem, bookmark lại và xem clip này.
Today on the main function, we're hanging out with Carl Pei, the founder of Nothing. He built a smartphone company that launched 2 years ago, and in those 2 years, they've gone to $600 million in annualized revenue. So we're going to talk about that and a whole lot more. Let's get started.
Chứ không phải total hả?
So why don't we start right at the top? For someone who runs a smartphone company, you're really young, actually. What was your journey into tech and into making smartphones specifically?
I was a big gadget fan when I was a kid. I think I was probably one of the first people in Sweden to have the iPod. And I was definitely the first among my friends to get the iPhone. And back then, the iPhone was a US exclusive with AT&T. And I had to get a US friend to buy it for me and pay a cancellation fee to AT&T, ship it to me. I had to jailbreak it to be able to use it.
How old were you when you first held the iPhone 1?
14? 18?
First iPhone was probably 18, maybe 18. And those early Apple products were super inspiring for me. And unfortunately, the iPod that I got broke just a week after the warranty ended. And I was very young at that time, so I couldn't really afford another iPod. And I got kind of pissed off because after 1 year and it broke. So one time when I was visiting relatives in China, we went to the electronics market and we bought a MP3 player from a brand called Meizu. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. I didn't know China could produce good quality electronics. So I got that. The sound quality was great. The design was beautiful. And I created a fan community around this brand. We were profiled a couple of years later in the Los Angeles Times. And then the company was really happy because there was this kid in Sweden doing being their spokesperson. And so they recruited me after uni.
Through the magic of the internet.
Through the magic of the internet. I was actually thinking about applying to YC at that time. So I was like weighing, okay, do I have to, back then it was all about consumer internet, right? Like it was a Facebook era. And I was like, should I write a pitch for YC or should I take this offer in China to be a part of the beginning of the smartphone kind of industry there? To be honest, I was just too lazy to write the pitch.
Wow, it was only 12 questions.
So I took the offer that I had and
Yeah.
I flew to China in 2011 and stayed there for 11 years. That's where I
11
learned
years.
how to make hardware.
So how did you get in touch
Ghê
with
vậy.
OnePlus? And you started off, I mean,
Mình cứ nghĩ
from your
11
this
months.
experience of creating a brand and creating a community, it translated very directly.
I went to this company and I love their products, but their founder was kind of depressed because their competitors were doing better than them. So for the year I was there, he never showed up to work. He was still working, like doing some UI design at home, but he never showed up to the company. So I lost a lot of respect, if I'm honest. Like I'm like, this guy's probably not gonna make it if he can't handle setbacks. So I started looking and talking to other companies.
Setback là thất bại.
Back then, Oppo was another company. I started looking and talking to other companies. And back then, Oppo was another company that I reached out to since I was already in the region. So I got recruited into Oppo, but then quickly I heard that they wanted to create a new brand to target the online market because Oppo was very offline distribution, offline sales channels.
I owned one of their DVD players / karaoke machines before.
Very cool.
Yeah.
There were new companies like selling products online that were really disrupting via D2C. So that was the original vision for OnePlus. Like, how can we take the Oppo supply chain advantages, huge scale?
Mình cũng có biết là cái thông tin là Oppo là chủ sở hữu của OnePlus, nhưng mà cũng không rõ chính xác là nó xuất phát điểm như nào. Nhưng mà đấy, hôm nay xem đến đây mới biết là thực ra là car là làm trong Oppo sẵn rồi, thế xong mới đứng lên để làm gọi là lãnh đạo cho cái line OnePlus.
Low cost, good quality, and sell products online and be really disruptive. And initially, like they were really focused on China. They built a management team around China, and I was like a 24-year-old kid. So I was like, hey, I don't want to do this old thing anymore. I want to do this new thing. And don't worry about like China. Like I'll take care of everything outside of China. You don't have any team for that anyway. And they were like, yeah, okay,
Go
whatever.
beyond
Like,
it.
we're going to be focused on the China market.
Was it Android already by then, or was it other OSs?
It was Android based.
Yeah.
And the way it works is Google does not have their services in China. So there was no Android build for my markets outside of China. And I don't know if you remember at that time, there was a company called Cyanogen. They started off as a community thing, like a custom ROM that got to millions of users.
Yeah.
And they had just become a company at that time.
They were sort of like a Linux skin back in the day, right?
Yeah.
And then it, obviously Android is a variant of Linux. So
Yeah, it was based
it
on
sounds
Android.
Like they were able to translate that very quickly.
They found a lot of users online and they had just raised money and they became a real company instead of this community thing. And I'm like, hey, we're starting something new, you're starting something new, so why don't we collaborate? So that's how we solved the problem of not having our own operating system for my international markets back then.
You stayed at OnePlus through 2021, was it?
Through 2020.
And then did you know that you were going to start nothing, or on day one, or did you have a moment in there where you're trying to figure out what the next thing would be?
Yeah, for the longest time I thought I was gonna travel the world for half a year at least, because at OnePlus I was so busy. I was working at least 6 days a week and just no real vacations for 7 years. But after 10 days on that holiday, it got kind of boring. I felt like I was burning away my life and I was still young and I was staying in fancy hotels and enjoying the drinks and the dinners and whatnot. But I felt a lot of anxiety that I wasn't contributing anything. So I quickly wrapped up the trip after 10 days, went back to Stockholm where I grew up and started reaching out to entrepreneurs there because I had never raised money before. So I started reaching out to all the entrepreneurs I knew and they kept introducing me to people. So basically in like 3 weeks in Sweden, I got coached by all the Swedish entrepreneurs on how to raise money. It was a super welcoming community. I'm sure it's the same here. I haven't spent as much time here.
That's the coolest thing about working with founders is that everyone sort of recognizes how hard it is, and then we're the ones who can help make it easier for each other.
Yeah, and it was really confusing at the time because everybody was giving me slightly different advice.
Oh yeah. Well, everyone has like n=1, like what I experienced.
Yeah, there's all these concepts like how do they fit together, but eventually it clicked, and we quickly raised the seed round at that time.
What was the first thing that you wanted to do? I mean, one of the trickier things about smartphones is that unlike software, you can't sit in a garage in front of 2 or 3 people in front of a computer and just like get a splashy launch out there. Like it's hardware, it's relationships. There's a whole value chain here, right?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, the idea wasn't super clear. I'm super ashamed of my seed deck. It's really, really bad. I think basically I just wanted to take all the learnings I had from OnePlus and do it better. That's how it started, but now over time the idea has changed a lot. So I guess at that stage, I just wanted to raise some money. We knew that it would be impossible to raise enough money to make a smartphone. We made a quick calculation at that time. I think we said we needed at least 100 million USD to make a phone. And
Wow.
I think there's no way to raise 100 million for me, at least in the seed stage. We also got shunned by a lot of the factories that made phones, like Foxconn, for instance. Foxconn at that time had worked with like 5 startups that made phones, and all those 5 startups have failed. And they're like, hey, we're not going to work with any more startups. We're just going to do our Apple thing and whatever and just make a little bit of money. No more startups.
So Foxconn is a contract manufacturer. This is one of the key players that you need to go and get a contract with because they're the ones who actually take all the components and integrate it and test it for you.
And they make iPhones as
Right.
well. So they're very happy with their Apple relationship. And there was a period of time where they took on a lot of risk with working with startups. But when it came our turn, that wasn't the case anymore.
What's the game theory there? I mean, Foxconn, normally you'd think that they would really want more competition for Apple because the problem that we see in startups all the time, it's happened to YC companies all the time, is single channel risk.
Yeah.
If you have one big buyer and they have 100% of your business, then guess who owns who, right?
Yeah.
So why isn't Foxconn worried about this?
They're worried, so that's why they tried working with countless startups, but they all failed.
Yeah.
And they lost money each time because they have opportunity costs. They have to invest in
tooling
engineering and even inventory, actually. I heard they used to, this is pretty crazy now, it doesn't happen anymore, but the factory, I mean the Foxconn and their competitors, they took on the inventory risk for the startups as well. So when the startups made a big projection in terms of the unit sales and they couldn't deliver, they were fine.
Yeah.
Foxconn was stuck with inventory.
I mean, that's a lot of nuance there, right? In order to create a value chain, like to actually create the supply chain, it's actually different companies that have to collaborate, trust each other, and take risk with one another, actually.
Yeah, it was very hard, if I'm honest. I felt like when it came our turn, the game had become a lot harder because of what happened in the past. So that's why we decided to make earbuds first. We're like, okay, nobody's going to trust us on making a phone. Let's make something smaller, but equally complicated. Not equally, but still quite complicated, because there's like antennas and Bluetooth and radio and stuff like that, and battery. And let's just sell a ton of them. Like, we sell a ton of them, and then the factories are going to want to work with us. However, when we started making earbuds, nobody wanted to take our business either. Because they were like, hey, there's 1,000 companies making earbuds. What makes you special? Who are you? Just because you worked at a larger company in the past doesn't mean you're going to be able to context switch and make a earbud startup successfully. So the only factory that wanted to work with us was a factory that had no other clients. Like, without us, they would go bankrupt. That's the only reason they took us up.
Underdog plus underdog.
Yeah, but it was a disaster. We do the engineering of the product. We do the design, engineering, and we also design the manufacturing line for each product. And then the factory just has to replicate our design, like each station, what is the task? And that factory couldn't replicate our process. So that in the end, the pogo pin, the metallic part of the case that connects to the metallic part of the earbuds that charges it, the spring wasn't strong enough.
Oh, man.
So for the first batch of ear ones, 90% of them couldn't charge properly.
Oh, no.
And at that time, I think we had shipped like 5,000 units.
Wow.
and we started getting a lot of feedback through our customer support
Nghe khó ngủ quá ấy.
channels. And we're like, oh my God, this is game over.
So that must have been a scary moment, right? So you raised your seed, you have the
Má, vừa có một chút tiền, cố mãi mới làm được 5.000 sản phẩm. Mà 5.000 sản phẩm, 90% của 5.000 sản phẩm không bị lỗi. Bị lỗi. Thế giới sụp đổ quá ấy.
this grand vision and plan that, we do this and then we get to do the smartphone.
Yeah.
And then out of the gate, you ship 5,000 and 90% of them are coming back as returns.
Yeah, so we were super friendly with our customers. We just shipped them new devices, and we immediately stopped the production, and we immediately rented out 2 apartments just outside of the factory, and we put 15 engineers in those apartments, and basically our engineers de facto became the factory floor managers, just overseeing like that every part of the factory was manufacturing to our spec, and then we got the quality up.
Oh, nice.
So we ended up selling about 600,000 units for year one.
600.000 cái tai nghe cơ à? Ui, mình không nghĩ là bán một cái tai nghe nó được nhiều thế. 600.000 nhân với cả bao nhiêu? Đấy nhá. Tab mới này.
So you saved it.
We saved it, but it was very
600 ebook hình như là cho 100 đô đi. Là 600.000 là 60 triệu à? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 60 triệu đô. Ghê ta.
very, very uncomfortable and scary at that time.
Yeah. What caused you to sort of roll up your sleeves right at that moment? Was it just either we do this or we die? Some people who obviously can't make hardware, they just sort of throw their hands up and they say, well, I guess that's it.
There's a beauty to not having another option. It forces you to survive. I've seen that multiple times in our journey. And each time we come out a little bit stronger, better processes or better teams or better partners. I think it's that. It's like the desire to keep on living as a company.
In terms of nothing users or nothing sort of your stalwart customers, there's a sense of if you know, you know. What does that mean? How did you cultivate that?
I think it simply just means that our brand awareness is too low, if I'm honest.
Well, what does that mean? There's a sense of if you know, you know. What does that mean? How did you cultivate that?
I think it simply just means that our brand awareness is too low, if I'm honest.
Well, I guess you could argue that it's like a growing cult brand. 600 mil a year in revenue is actually quite a lot, in terms of how big a company might be. But on the other hand, it's not, a large majority of the smartphone market by any stretch yet.
I feel this time is different. This time around, our current users are partially tech enthusiasts and partially kind of creatives, people who like design, who like fashion and music, and we didn't have that community before. So I think because we've been a lot more design centric this time around with nothing, it's really helped us attract a different type of crowd. Our Instagram feed is very curated, kind of like a hybrid between a luxury fashion brand and a tech brand. The visuals have really attracted a different type of user.
So if you had to guess or give advice to people who are trying to make a hardware startup, what percentage should they be Tim Cook versus Johnny Ive?
I think for most people, they should be 90% Tim Cook, if I'm honest, because survival is the name of the game for hardware. Only when you survive and you pick up in volumes, when you pick up in volumes, you can get stronger engineering teams, you get lower prices. This industry is so volume driven. So I think in the beginning you should be like Tim
volume
Cook.
driven.
Over time you can become more like Johnny Ive, or you should be more like Johnny Ive over time as you create more differentiation in the product. It's not something people want to hear, I think, but I think it's the truth.
Is there a max amount of Johnny Ive you should be?
Yeah, maybe it's 20%.
Yeah.
80% be safe.
Yeah.
20% take a risk, and you can increase the threshold 20% to something higher over time.
So let's talk about the glyph interface in the context of sort of this Tim Cook versus Johnny Ive thing. It seems like a really good example of 90% Tim Cook, 10% Johnny Ive.
You might have heard of Jesper, the founder of Teenage Engineering. He's one of
legend.
he's one of my partners in this company, and I learned this one thing from him, and it's basically For every product you make, imagine if a user sees it for like 2 seconds and then has to sketch a defining feature of the product. So we try and build each product with something iconic that people can immediately remember and attach themselves to. That was like the thinking behind the Glyph interface. On a product functionality level, we have this thought that, when Steve Jobs pitched the personal computer, it was pitched as the bicycle for the mind. It enabled us to do way more stuff creatively. However, the modern smartphone is just so far away from that idea. It's making us more addicted, it's making us sad, it's making us watch garbage content on TikTok. So how can we make people more mindful about their smartphone usage? And we wanted to allow people to flip the phone over and just through light, we wanted to talk. So how can it's making us watch garbage content on TikTok. So how can we make people more mindful about their smartphone usage? And we wanted to allow people to flip the phone over and just through lights on the back of the phone, know all the important things that are happening so they don't have to always check the screen or turn on the screen. Because once you turn on the screen and unlock it, you just want to do the next thing and just want to scroll a little bit on your Twitter feed or whatever. So we would have useful things like being able to set different patterns for different people so you know who's trying to contact you. Or we've done integrations with Google Calendar and Uber. So in Uber's case, you can see how far the Uber is without turning over your phone. It's like a countdown with the lights. Google Calendar, you can see how much time there is to your next meeting. So just things that keep you away from kind of doom scrolling.
Okay, we're gonna do a segment around design. So purely from a design perspective, tell me your favorite sneaker.
This is a hard question because I've changed. I used to collect sneakers, all the like collabs and stuff. But lately I've just been wearing kind of classic white
Adidas.
Common projects.
Common project.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your favorite Apple product?
This might sound a bit strange, but it's the volume knob UI on the first gen iPad when it was still skeuomorphic. That's the moment I fell in love with Apple. Like that's such a small detail, right? On the original iPad, if you swiped up, you got this kind of control panel thing with the volume knob on the left side, and it was like brushed metal. And as you tilted the iPad, the gyroscope recognized it got tilted, so the light reflection on the brushed metal also changed. I was like, wow, if Apple cares about such a minute detail in the product, I'll trust them completely because they've really thought through everything else.
We need to bring skeuomorphism back.
I
hate flat design personally.
Yeah, same here.
It's a very unpopular opinion. People love flat design, but
Common
I'm not a
project
fan, so bring me back. What's your favorite watch?
It's probably my Royal Oak.
Nice, classic.
Yeah, I'm not a super big smartwatch. Royal Oak.
Cái gì?
So bring me back. What's your favorite watch?
Royal Oak luôn à? Patek Philippe mà. Đâu phải Patek, nhầm AP chứ.
It's probably my Royal Oak.
Nice, classic.
Yeah,
nope,
I'm not a super big smartwatch fan, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
Like I get a ton of notifications on my phone, and just having another machine to keep beeping, I was not a fan of that.
Yeah, kind of a nightmare.
Yeah.
Best sci-fi movie aesthetic.
Aesthetic.
Yeah.
Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
A lot of our brand, we have a lot of like Space Odyssey screenshots on our mood board for the brand.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. I'm super into Blade Runner, so it's, yeah, 2049. I don't know, anything, both like the original and the Denis Villeneuve remake, just pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's pretty cool too. We also have screenshots from Blade Runner.
Oh yeah, definitely. Carl, thanks a lot for hanging out with us today. I really enjoyed this conversation, and you built something of great value that, in some ways you've been through many ego deaths, and then in other ways I can see the trajectory on this. And
we're just getting started, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any last words for now, to leave our audience? A lot of people who are watching might want to start hardware startups. You've created one of the hardest ones to do, which is in the smartphone category. What do you have to tell them?
Yeah, I think there's no beating around the bush. It's going to be tough, but it's doable. If you want to do it, I think you should go ahead. But maybe think about like the sequencing of things. Like in our example, like we had to get the earbuds to sell really well before going into the phone. Like how can we build credibility to the next thing? And I think some people watching this might be a little bit confused as to why do it at all when there's other things you can be doing and this sounds really hard. But I would just like to say that there is a lot of satisfaction in seeing people in the real world using a product that you've helped build, especially if they don't recognize you. If they don't recognize you as the maker of the product, that means your brand is growing in brand awareness. and you're reaching new people. I think that feeling is just so different compared to if you're making an app or some server-side infra.
Well, thanks for working on it. And if anything, I'm kind of surprised that there aren't more. I think it's a testament to how hard it is to create what you've created. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and hopefully somebody watching this will create the next one.
You know it.
Hay thế, hay thế. Kiểu một clip khá dài, cũng 21 phút. Mà mình xem kiểu cảm giác vèo vắt hết rồi. Đây là clip thứ hai mình xem Car nói chuyện. Rất là respect. Vừa nãy trong đoạn cuối khi mà nói về phần hardware thì mình nhớ đến cái việc là rất là nhiều năm rồi mình có suy nghĩ trong đầu là mình muốn làm một cái product cầm được thực sự thực tế, và nó là cái áo thun. Vì đơn giản thôi là mặc dù là mình rất là thích cái áo thun hiện tại bây giờ mình đang mặc, nhưng mà có một số thứ mà nó chưa đúng như mình mong muốn. Cái cổ, cái túi không có, và chất liệu. Mặc dù là mình cũng nhìn thấy ông này là ông gì, Gary gì nhỉ? Không phải Gary V, không nhớ tên ông này. Nhưng mà ông ấy mặc một cái áo rất là màu đen ấy, rất là, mặc dù đây mình áo của Kai nhá thì mình không thích lắm, nhưng mà áo của ông Hồng Vấn này mình rất thích. Có thể là do không, ý là mình thích ý của mình là mình có thích cái cổ. Nhưng có thể là do là cái tạng người nó to hơn ấy, cho nên cái cổ nó vừa hơn. Nhưng mà đó, mình vẫn rất là muốn làm một cái gì đấy sờ nắm được, mà muốn start với cả một chiếc áo thun màu đen này. Bây giờ mới bắt tay vào làm đây, suốt ngày nghĩ. Rồi mình muốn double check Kirkland là một brand của gì nhỉ, của Costco à? Costco phải Costco không? Đúng rồi, Costco này. Thì đại ý là Kirkland cũng có một cái áo mà một số người ở Việt Nam, một số người kiểu có khả năng mua đồ xịn đi, nhưng mà họ rất là thích cái brand, cái áo này. Mặc dù nó chỉ là một cái brand rất là bình thường của Costco thôi, giống kiểu như là Coopmark thì có một cái brand, những cái sản phẩm riêng của Coopmark ấy, thì Kirkland cũng tương tự như vậy. Rồi, đây clip đầu tiên. Clip thứ hai nó sẽ là House Store. Xem cái này thứ sau đi. Mình muốn xem cái này. Who really measure the calories in food của Hometown.
Time, and I wanted to know how many calories they have. I have this snack that I make all the time, and I wanted to know how many calories they have. We're used to seeing these numbers that tell us how much fuel we get from different foods, but how do they know how many calories are in there?
I think this is a question that a lot of people think they already know the answer to.
Yeah, definitely. When we started talking about this subject, I was like, oh, I'm pretty sure they just put it in a special oven and burn it and see how much energy comes out. And that's not it, is what you're saying.
Well, it turns out they don't really do that.
Okay, so what do they do? How do they figure it out?
I want to take a second to try to strip away all of the associations that we have attached to calories and think about what a calorie really is. It's a unit of energy. Energy that's stored in the bonds between the atoms and molecules that make up the macronutrients that make up our food. And if we want to know how much energy, we can light it on fire in the presence of oxygen, surround the fire with water, and measure how much that water heats up. That's what a bomb calorimeter does. And the calorie, with a capital C, which is technically a kilocalorie, is the amount of heat energy that it takes to raise the temperature of the water by 1 degree.
Energy need to heat 1 kilogram by of water by 1 Celsius.
Multiply that heat by a couple thousand, and you get a sense of how much energy our bodies use every day to move around, grow cells, have thoughts, fight off microbes, keep the heart beating, the lungs breathing, and all the rest. All powered by oxygen, meeting up with food. That chemistry is not too different from how a fire releases energy from wood. But of course, our bodies are a bit more complicated than that.
Chú hiểu cái đoạn này.
That a calorie, how much that we can light it on fire that make up our food. And if we want to know how much energy, we can light it on fire in the presence of oxygen.
In the presence of oxygen.
Surround the fire with water and measure how much that water heats up. That's what a bomb calorimeter does. And the calorie, with a capital C, which is technically a kilocalorie, is the amount of heat energy that it takes to raise the temperature of the water by 1 degree. Multiply that heat by a couple thousand, and you get a sense of how much energy our bodies use every day to move around, grow cells, have thoughts, fight off microbes, keep the heart beating, the lungs breathing, and all the rest. All powered by oxygen, meeting up with food. That chemistry is not too different from how a fire releases energy from wood, but of course our bodies are a bit more complicated than that.
A bomb calorimeter can tell us how much energy is stored in that food sample, but this is the key thing, and I did not realize this until I was researching it. The calorie number on the nutrition facts label isn't supposed to tell us the total amount of energy in the food. It's supposed to show the amount of energy that our bodies get from the food. And so to get an accurate count, you really have to measure the food energy that our bodies are not using. So the amount of energy that's wasted or excreted.
Right. Okay. So we're talking
Poop and pee.
Okay. Wow. All right. So this is already getting a lot more messy than I had previously supposed.
So they don't do that. It's not practical to do those kinds of studies. We will come back to human waste later in this story, but for now I'll explain what the food companies do instead.
This episode is sponsored by Storyblocks.
Storyblocks.
What is that? This is a new thing to me.
Yeah. So the whole deal with Storyblocks is that instead of being a stock library where you pick out a clip and buy it, you pay a subscription and then you get unlimited downloads. It incentivizes them to be so they sort of are constantly curating and almost editing softwares, including After.
Get more into like
The things I used is a text animation preset.
I have been thinking like I need to get more into like downloading After Effects presets just to like, because every time I'm starting out from scratch.
Yeah, they also have like backgrounds, textures. They actually have sound effects and also music.
Thanks, Storyblocks.
We have a URL.
Oh, yeah,
Our first URL, which is storyblocks.com/howtown. You don't have to remember that because we will put the link in the description. And that is where you go if you want to get started with unlimited stock media downloads at one set price.
Nice.
So all that food companies actually need to get their nutrition facts is a recipe. 3 ripe bananas, 1/3 cup canola 1 oil, teaspoon vanilla extract, quick cooking rolled oats, 1/2 cup dark chocolate 1/2 cup dried cherries, 1/2 cup chopped roasted almonds. That recipe just goes into some software. I used a site called Recipal, and out comes a label.
So I have this very simple banana oatmeal cookie. You really can't call it a cookie. It's like a breakfast blob thing. And I used your service to create a nutrition facts label for it. And it told me that if I eat 4 of these oat blobs, it gives me around 520 calories of energy. And my question for you is, how do you come up with that number?
Yeah, so each of those ingredients are like entries in our database. And most of that, like those 2 checkmark ingredients are getting pulled from the USDA, and it's not your specific banana, but it's like a banana.
Reference banana.
Yeah, they have thousands of reference like standard ingredients that people use in everyday life, and they've kind of been collecting and sampling and testing them over time to create like a pretty useful kind of public good in this nutrition database.
So if Recipal's numbers come from nutrition databases, then we need to find out where the numbers in nutrition databases come from. We can search through some of those databases on the website of the US Department of Agriculture. For each food, they list the vitamins and minerals determined through lab testing. That's what analytical means. But when you scroll up to find the calories, it says it doesn't come from lab testing. Instead, it says calculated. And in the documentation, the USDA explains that a lot of the calorie numbers are, quote, calculated using the Atwater general factors of 4, 9, and 4 for protein, fat, and carbohydrates. All right, what does that mean? Protein, fat, and carbohydrates, we learned those are the macronutrients. That's where we get the energy from our food. And 4, 9, and 4 are the calorie values for a gram of each of those macronutrients. So if a banana has 22 grams of carbohydrates, you multiply that times 4, multiply each gram of fat by 9, and each gram of protein by 4, and you get a total for each ingredient. Then add those up to get a total for your recipe. Most articles online would just leave it at that, but since this is Howtown, I'm sorry, we do have to figure out how they came up with 4, 9, and 4. So we have these 3 special numbers that food companies are using to convert the macronutrients of their products into calories. Where did these numbers come from?
Well, they were devised by Wilbur Atwater in the beginning of the 20th century. What he was doing was as careful and as rigorous as could be done in the early 1900s with the kind of equipment that he had available. And it's a real tribute to what a good scientist he is that his results are still being used.
Wilbur Owen Atwater was an American chemist who spent 4 decades studying the nutrients of different foods and putting people in boxes for days to study their metabolism. He was deeply interested in what people should eat to meet their nutritional needs. Atwater was enchanted by how the law of conservation of energy applied to our bodies. And he had a kind of spiritual way of writing about food. And I would love to read you a passage.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
He wrote this in 1887. I often think that the greatest creation of human genius is the medieval cathedral. If this be so, the power that lifted the stones of the cathedral into their places, the thought that planned its architecture and composed its music, the emotions and the voice of those who bend and who in responsive adoration express the sentiments of its worship, are all in one way or another the products of that energy which once existed in space, rested for eons in the central orb of our system, and part of which, coming to us in those things which we designate as food, abides for a time in our own bodies and our own brains to give us life and power and thought.
Wow.
I definitely screenshotted this passage so I can use it as an excuse when I want to go to Taco Bell.
I mean, I really like this. I think this is, I actually sometimes think about food this way of like, oh, you know, every plant we see is just sort of storing the energy that comes from the sun. And so when you eat a bit of a plant, you're sort of like getting this delayed release of sunlight that's like powering your body. I mean, it's very cool. And I'm very on board with this nutritionist poet guy.
Yeah, this is the guy whose methods are enshrined in our nutrition facts labels because he's the one who came up with these calorie conversion factors. Atwater's real goal in all of this wasn't nutrition labels, it was to learn how much energy people were getting from their diets. So he could measure what their diets were made out of, how much protein, fat, and carbohydrates. That comes from a standard set of lab tests called proximate analysis, which I'm not going to explain, but I'll put a link in the sources if you want to learn more. What they didn't know was how much energy we get from each of those macronutrients. Now, most foods contain a mix of the macronutrients, but there are some, like lean beef, butter, and sugar, that are composed almost entirely of either protein, fat, or carbohydrates. They put those in the bomb calorimeter, and they got a starting point for the calories. But remember, they needed to adjust those numbers to account for the waste. What did Atwater need to do in order to figure out not just how much energy was in fat and protein and carbohydrates, but how much energy our bodies can actually get out of those nutrients?
The problem with bomb calorimeters is that they burn foods to completion, but that's not what happens in the body. So you have to get a fudge factor that's going to account for that kind of thing. And there are a number of fudge factors that are involved in all of these things because some foods are more digestible than others, and that has to be accounted for.
It's kind of incredible that Dr. Nessel said fudge factors, because we are returning to the poop stuff now. So Atwater would bring people into his lab and feed them a bit of lamp black, which is a carbon pigment, followed by a diet that had been measured for its macronutrients. And over the course of a few days, he'd collect all of their waste, starting with the black marker, and then by testing the poop for leftover macronutrients, they found that in general, we don't digest 8% of the protein we eat, 5% of the fat, and 3% of the carbohydrates. They also measured the energy from protein that we excrete through urine and estimated the loss at one.
Có nghe trong kích có 8% là protein à? Nghe ngon vậy.
They also measured the energy from protein that we excrete through urine and estimated the loss at 1.25 calories per gram. And you take all of those fudge factors and adjust the gross energy of the macronutrients, and you end up with 4, 8.9, and 4. Over time, the factor for fat was rounded up to 9.
So those values were convenient because they were whole numbers. Everybody could use them. They multiplied easily. And they've held up pretty well as approximations.
If you look at the table where Atwater published these conversion factors in 1899, the title refers to nutrients in a mixed diet. It's not clear if he ever thought that they should be used to calculate the calories of individual food products the way we do today.
No.
And he had weighed those factors based on what people were eating in like 1902. While I do like ginger snaps as much as the next guy, it does seem like the entire produce aisle is missing. The Atwater general factors say we get 9 calories for every gram of fat, and that's true if the fat is from meat, but if it's from vegetable oil, it's actually 8.84. The general factor for protein is 4 calories per gram, but if the protein is from eggs, it's 4.4, and if the protein is from brown rice, it's 3.4. The Atwater factors tend to overestimate the energy we get from plant-based foods. These numbers are from a USDA report in 1955, which reviewed all of the data from Atwater and from the 50 years after Atwater's work, and provided these more specific conversion factors for a subset of foods. So those nutrition databases we saw will sometimes provide estimates based on the general factors and also on the more specific factors. The food companies can use either one for their labels. For my oat blobs, Recipal used the specific factors, but even those can misrepresent the true values sometimes because they're averaging some big categories of foods. And one consequence of that is our calorie labels are pretty inaccurate when it comes to certain nuts. There was a study where they basically revisited some of Atwater's methods. They started with a brilliant blue dye capsule this time, and they were given a base diet, and then they introduced a certain amount of almonds, had them collect all of their poop in a cooler, collect all of their pee, and what these researchers concluded was that the Atwater factors overstate the energy we get from almonds and walnuts by about 20%. This study was funded by the nut industry. So
it seems like that could go either way. If I was funding a nut study, if I was a big nut, oh boy, if I was, the nut industry, I'm not sure if I would want it to be discovered that nuts had less calories or more calories. I don't know. I'm not sure if
it all depends on sort of what you need. And Marian Nessel, who's the nutritionist and molecular biologist who I spoke to, says that there's lots of ways that these calorie counts could be more precise and accurate, but she thinks that they're good enough.
Why do you need it to be more accurate? What's the difference between 90 and 100 calories? I would say nothing, really, which is why I think this is, this exercise about the number of calories in foods is not very helpful, because in order to know exactly what you're eating, you would have to know every single ingredient that's in your food. You'd have to measure every single ingredient in your food to the nearest milligram, probably. All you can do is make ballpark guesses.
There's so much variability in portion sizes. If you're trying to do precise math with your food, I feel like there's so many ways that could get messed up in either direction, just in little ways.
The general takeaway on the calorie counts from the nutrition facts is that, there's no testing required, there's no approval in advance, they allow a 20% error, and if you've noticed, they're rounded to the nearest 10 if it's above 50 calories, rounded to the nearest 5 if they're below 50 calories, and that just reflects that, we don't want to put a false
precision on this number. It's a general estimate based on research subjects who were, studied 100 years ago. They pooped so that we can count.
Thanks, poopers.
Thanks, poopers. There's more on our Patreon. So something that I didn't talk about in the calories video, is alcohol. There are calories in alcohol, but typically they're not disclosed through a label. But there's big news on this. Ireland is actually passing a law that's supposed to change that.
Cái này không xem, cái này xem bản quyền chết. Rồi, cái thứ ba mình xem How the CIA stole a Russian submarine.
It is 1968, in the midst of the Cold War. The Soviet submarine K-129 quietly sails through the deep waters of the Pacific. Suddenly, around 1,500 miles northwest of Hawaii, it vanishes from radar. To this day, no one knows why it sank. On board the deep-sea vessel are weapons and technology of immense value, sparking one of the most spectacular salvage missions and diversion campaigns in CIA history.
What are you doing here?
This is the truly insane story of Project Azorian.
Azorian?
On March 8, 1968, officers at a US naval base record an unusual signal through their sound surveillance system. SOSUS is a state-of-the-art technology to detect submarines. The signal, which presumably originates from an underwater implosion, can be traced to a specific location around 1,500 miles northwest of Hawaii. It's an area known to be patrolled by the Soviet Navy. Meanwhile, in a Soviet control center, the Soviets make several radio checks on their ballistic missile submarine K-129, all without success. Something is wrong. They immediately initiate a massive search for the missing vessel. It will last a full 2 months with no success. As a result, K-129 is considered lost, along with its 83 crew members. The US military closely monitors the activity of the Soviet Navy from a distance. Once the Soviets call off their rescue mission, the Americans decide to send the USS Halibut in an effort to investigate the anomalous signal. The Halibut, once a nuclear-powered missile submarine, is specifically repurposed for this mission. It now operates as a special ops spy ship. It features cutting-edge sonar and satellite technology, replacing its missile systems with specialized intelligence-gathering equipment. With the advantage of their advanced technology, the US Navy is able to narrow down the search area. In July 1968, the USS Halibut starts its journey to the search area from Pearl Harbor. After 2 months of searching the ocean floor, the submarine finally locates something strange. They deploy a small cable-controlled device. This device can descend to depths inaccessible to the submarine and gather information on the terrain of the seabed. Like a little fish, the device dives down and takes photos of the strange object on the ocean floor. And there it is. The wreck of K-129, lying at an incredible depth of 5,000 meters.
5,000 mét.
The US is starting to understand why the Soviets undertook such a massive rescue mission. the submarine likely carries highly valuable weapons and top-secret technology. Stuff the Soviets really wouldn't want the Americans to get their hands on. Back in Washington, D.C., curiosity is growing. The government is aware of the unique situation. As a result, President Richard Nixon approves a risky mission. If it fails, it could trigger a hot war between the USA and the Soviet Union. At that time, the Cold War had reached a détente, a temporary ease of the arms race. But the chance of retrieving an enemy vessel carrying invaluable military treasures is too significant to ignore. This marks the beginning of a truly unbelievable mission. The CIA is ordered to conduct a secret operation. In contrast to the military, the intelligence agency works more efficiently and is less regulated. At least that's what experts say. Recovering a submarine from a depth of 5,000 meters is a challenging and expensive task. The agency's solution, while seemingly bizarre, is very straightforward. They want to build a massive claw to lift the submarine from the ocean floor, similar to an 80s arcade game. But instead of stuffed animals, you get a Soviet war machine. The CIA comes up with a plan. A special ship is required. It needs to carry a giant claw capable of grabbing a colossal submarine. But it has to look like a civilian vessel from the outside. How do you build such a ship without arousing suspicion from the press or Soviet spies? It wouldn't be a CIA operation without a proper cover story. To help them out, the CIA selects none other than the billionaire and aerospace tycoon Howard Hughes. He shall play the leading role in a well-orchestrated diversion campaign. Howard Hughes lives secluded on the top floor of the Desert Inn Hotel in Las Vegas. He's eccentric, paranoid, and extremely rich. The way he does business is unconventional, and he's known for his many ventures. Some people refer to him as the Elon Musk of the 60s. As part of the diversion campaign, Hughes expands his business ventures into deep-sea mining. He creates a company dedicated to mineral exploration and commissions the construction of a deep-sea mining vessel, the Hughes Glomar Explorer. The ship is constructed in plain sight. Officially, it's built for the exploration of manganese nodules, small mineral formations found on the ocean floor. To further the illusion, Hollywood actor Richard Anderson is hired to endorse Howard Hughes' new endeavors. In a dedicated commercial, they pretend to try to sell the project to the mining industry.
I am now aboard what is probably the most technologically advanced seagoing vessel in the world today, the Glomar Explorer.
Meanwhile, the CIA commissions Lockheed, renowned for developing spy planes, to secretly construct a massive claw capable of grabbing an entire submarine. Nobody notices what's really happening. The construction takes over 4 years and costs around $350 million. For the US government, the ship is worth every penny. The stakes are high. The mission cannot fail under any circumstances. From a technical viewpoint, the Glomar Explorer is truly a fascinating ship. It weighs 50,000 tons and is 189 meters in length, equipped with a giant hoisting mechanism. A large internal hangar, the so-called moon pool, provides access to the ocean. The plan is to use the claw to lift the Soviet submarine up into the moon pool, where it could be deposited and inspected. But how do you lower the claw 5,000 meters into the ocean? Aboard the ship are 600 giant steel pipes, each 9 meters in length. During the claw's descent, these steel pipes are connected to one another by a mounting crane on deck, thus forming one single 5,000 meter long pipe that can reach down into the abyss. Additionally, the ship and claw are equipped with advanced sonar and positioning systems to accurately locate the wreckage site. And so it begins.
What kind of vessel are you?
Complex operations like these wouldn't be possible without sophisticated engineering skills. A great place to learn such skills is brilliant. You can other into the It's the summer of 1974. 6
năm.
years of preparation have gone by. Meanwhile, K-129 is slowly decaying on the ocean floor. The recovery ship is on course to the wreck site. The preparations went according to plan and morale is high. One of the members documents their excitement in a diary.
The sky was leaden, yet the crew had spirits that were as bright as polished silver. Mission impossible? Nonsense. Impossible was not in our vocabulary.
A few days into the journey, the Glomar Explorer receives critical intelligence. The Soviet trekking ship Chasma is patrolling these waters and expected to cross the Glomar's path. When they arrive, the Soviets seem suspicious. To further investigate what's going on, they launch a helicopter. The crew of the Glomar is nervously watching as the Soviet helicopter makes several low passes near their ship. If the Soviets uncover the true purpose of the Glomar's mission, it could escalate into a dangerous conflict. Eventually, the helicopter returns to its ship. The Glomar Explorer and Chasma open communication over radio.
We are on our way home and heard your Foghorn. What are you doing here?
The Americans are getting real nervous now. The Chasma was not within hearing distance of the Glomar. The Americans are getting real nervous now. The Chasma was not within hearing distance of the Glomar. This seems to be a lie. But the CIA agents stick to their cover story.
We are conducting ocean mining tests. Deep ocean mining tests.
What kind of vessel are you?
A deep ocean mining vessel.
How much time will you be here?
We expect to finish testing in 2 to 3 weeks.
I wish you all the best.
The Chasma signs off, turns around and heads back to its home port, Petropavlovsk. Following this nerve-wracking encounter, the Glomar Explorer can finally proceed with its actual mission. Very slowly, the colossal claw begins its descent into the deep, dark ocean. Every now and then, a Soviet ship curiously passes by. The crew is getting ever more tense. After about a week, the sonar system attached to the claw detects the seabed. Another week of prep and troubleshooting follows. Finally, the claw secures the wreck and the lift begins. The 2,700-ton submarine ascends from its
2.700 tấn.
watery grave. The claws pulling it up meter by meter. It seems to be going well. Then, suddenly, the claw partly breaks and opens. In turn, over half of the submarine breaks off and sinks back into the depths. With most of K-129 tumbling down to the ocean floor, the mission failed, at least in parts. Years of hard work, tax money, meticulous planning and secrecy, for what? Less than half a submarine. But that's not the end of the story.
Aftermath.
Immediately after the failed first attempt, the CIA plans a second mission to recover the remaining parts of K-129. But in February 1975, the Los Angeles Times exposes Project Azorian. In an article, they reveal the true mission of the Hughes Glomar Explorer. During the first mission, someone broke into Howard Hughes' LA offices and stole top-secret files. The files link him and his supposed mining ship to the CIA. The news spread rapidly, forcing the US government to issue a public statement. To avoid embarrassing the Soviets and jeopardizing diplomatic progress, the government crafts a carefully ambiguous response. We can neither confirm nor deny. A phrase that became known as the Glomar response. Today it's a popular way for government officials to reveal nothing while still saying something. Either way, the leak marked the end of Project Azorian. With the cover blown, a second attempt to retrieve the remains of K-129 was rendered impossible. To this day, the contents of the recovered section remain a mystery. Official CIA reports state that only some torpedoes were found, but no cryptographic codes, machines, or other significant technology. The veracity of that claim is, of course, debatable. The CIA did find 6 deceased Soviet crew members in the retrieved section of the submarine. These men were given a formal burial at sea, which was filmed by a CIA documentary crew. The footage was declassified and presented to Russian President Boris Yeltsin in 1992 as a gesture of goodwill. Most of K129 remains 5,000 meters deep in the Pacific Ocean. The exact coordinates are still classified.
Chưa chắc. Ở đâu Nga hoặc là Mỹ đã có một cái mission khác thì sao? Rồi, hôm nay thì khá là productive về 3 clip. Nhưng mà mình vẫn thích nhất là clip đầu tiên của Ca Pai còn một clip này nữa về Mad Drive, nhưng mà hẹn gặp lại vào lần sau. Lần sau không biết là ngày mai, ngày kia hay là thứ hai, nhưng mà bye bye. Yo.